There are historians who say, well, the Jews were silly and Rabbi Akiva was a fool and they never should have revolted against the Romans because they never had a chance, and therefore it was a very terrible policy and it led to disaster, and one disaster after the other. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that had they not kept rebelling against the Romans, they would not have built this resistance and this historical memory of rebellion and opposition to Avodah Zarah and destruction of Judaism, which they had paid for so dearly. And there are those who claim, we know, for example, not long after the revolt of Bar Kokhba is the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the redactor of the Mishnah, correct? He was a Talmid of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who was a Talmid of, and others who were Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, right? So he was a generation and a half or something after Rabbi Akiva. And the Roman emperor of that time, Antoninus, Antony, was very friendly with Rabbi. So how all of a sudden how come they were such friends all of a sudden? All right, well, we don't know exactly. And we also know that Marcus Aurelius was also well disposed towards the Jews. There are those who claim, again, it's hard to know because the fact is we don't have all the facts. It's not like history that happened 100 years ago. These things happened a long time ago. We have fragmentary documents and evidence, and there's a lot of guesswork involved, and sometimes intelligent guesswork and sometimes less intelligent. But we don't know all the facts. But it's possible that the Romans, look, it's a fact that Marcus Aurelius, or was it already Antonius, proclaimed that the Jewish religion was to be a protected religion in the Roman Empire, and the Jews could not be persecuted. That's a big turnaround. Why did that happen? What caused that to happen? They were under Hadrian, and before Hadrian apparently also, but certainly under Hadrian they were persecuted. Brit Milah was outlawed, Talmud Torah was outlawed, etc., etc. All of a sudden the Jews are a protected group and they have a special status. How did that come about? There are those who claim, some historians claim, this is because the Romans understood that the Jews would not end revolting. They would rebel again and again unless they began to adopt a different policy towards the Jews. And that's so if that's the case, all these revolts eventually worked. In other words, in the end we won, because we got them to understand that they could not force us to be like everybody else in the Roman Empire. They could not force us to worship the idols of their Caesar, and they could not force us to not do Brit Milah for our sons. And they eventually had to understand that these Jews were a different bunch altogether, and we're going to have to somehow get along with them. Yes, we're in charge and we're going to tax them to death and all that, that's true, but we'll have to allow them to live the way they want to live, basically, and not tread on their toes too much. So whether these various wars and rebellions and all that destruction actually paid off in the end, it's quite possible that it did. Again, there are those who say it's not true at all, that it just led to tremendous disaster and suffering, and it would not have been that way had they not revolted against the Romans. Maybe. I don't think anyone can actually say with certainty. The fact is, there were such rebellions, repeated rebellions, large-scale repeated rebellions, particularly this one led by Shimon ben Kuspa, supported by Rabbi Akiva, against the Romans, were unheard of in the Roman Empire. That's the true history of that period in Jewish history.